This moves to the second part. So this is like I said, a pragmatic fallibilist approach to science and scientific truth. And fallibilism has long been considered, well, there's a mixed history on the stance philosophers have taken on fallibilism. It comes in and out of fashion. So currently, it's a pretty popular view in the philosophy of science. But not long ago, a lot of people thought it was crazy, right? In other words, people argued, notably David Lewis, who I quoted in today's lecture, argued that fallibilism is mad. Right? So Lewis says, just look at this line. I know the P, but it's possible that P is wrong. Right? So someone like Lewis says, that's insane, or that's just incoherent. To speak this way is to indicate that you don't know what the word know means. Right? If you know something, if you know the P, then you shouldn't say in the next breath that it's possible that P is wrong. And the fallibilist argues that this essentially is misinterpreting what fallibilism really means. So when I say it's possible that P is wrong in ordinary conversation, I'm suggesting that it's quite possible, or that there's a significant chance that P is wrong. And the fallibilist doesn't mean that when he says, I know that P, but it's possible that P is wrong. What the fallibilist really means is P, right, this proposition is true, even though there's an insignificant chance that not P. And when you point that out, when you make that specification, fallibilism doesn't really look mad anymore. It looks kind of sensible. It's like, yeah, you can say that you know something, even though there's an insignificant chance that it might not be true. Okay, this is the point where I think we get to the material in today's lecture that was most difficult. Once we say that the fallibilist believes P, even though there's an insignificant chance that not P, we're in a position where we have to define significance, right? So whether or not you know hangs on significance, right? So you only know something if there's an insignificant chance that the thing that you claim to know is not true. So we need to define significance. And being fallibilists, these authors provide a pragmatist justification, a pragmatist account of what significance means. So I've reconstructed this part as an argument, as a couple of conditionals that lead to a conclusion that the authors of the text in which this argument occurs think is a kind of counterintuitive and difficult, but nevertheless correct conclusion. So here's what the argument is. If I know P, then the chance that not P is insignificant. Okay, so that's just a conditional expression of P, even though there's an insignificant chance that not P. So the fallibilist believes, if I know P, then the chance that not P is insignificant. Second premise, if the chance that not P is insignificant, then I'll be willing to put P to work in belief or action. So this is a pragmatist definition of significance. Right? So the chance that not P is insignificant if I'm willing to put P to work in belief or action. On the other hand, if the chance that not P was significant, then I wouldn't be willing to put it to work. So again, this is a kind of pragmatist criterion for judging significance. Significance is determined according to whether or not the person is willing to put put the proposition to work in belief or action. And the third premise of the argument says whether I'm willing to put P to work will depend on the stakes involved. Now this is just a very intuitive idea, right? So if I think that some proposition is true, I'll want different levels of certainty according to the stakes involved. Right? So I might believe that I know what the outcome of an election is going to be. And I might say with some level of certainty that I know it's true. But I might then turn around and say, oh, I'm no longer willing to claim I know that when someone challenges me to a bet, for example. They say, oh, well, if you're so certain that you know what the outcome is going to be, why don't you put some money down on it, right? So, and I might not be willing to do that. I might say, look, I feel like I know this outcome, but I'm not willing to put it to work in these circumstances because the stakes are too high. I can't afford to engage in that kind of betting behavior. And then this leads to what the authors think is a counterintuitive conclusion. Whether I know P depends on the stakes, right? So follow the words in red here, right? So if I know P, then the chance that not P is insignificant. If the chance that not P is insignificant, then I'll be willing to put P to work in belief or action. Whether I'm willing to put P to work will depend on the stakes involved. And that means whether I know P depends on the stakes. So I think if you follow through that argument, and hopefully everyone will do this in seminar and talk about it, it's pretty clear why it leads to this conclusion. And the question is, what's the problem with this conclusion? The authors say it leads to something called pragmatic encroachment. This is where basically the practical stakes involved in believing something are encroaching on whether or not you claim to have knowledge about that thing, right? And some people will say, well, this is a new kind of madness. It's not saying that this is mad, right? Stakes should affect what it's proper to do. And that was the point I was trying to make with these water buffalo, right? So these guys are having a disagreement. That guy believes that P, right? He believes that it's a crocodile, and he thinks there's an insignificant chance that not P, and he turns out to be wrong, right? And the point of this GIF is that the stakes should have affected the guy's belief that whether or not that was a crocodile. Sorry, it would have been rational for this guy to say, no, I'm not going to step on that. I know that it's a log, right? Or sorry, I know that it's a crocodile, but I'm not willing to test that belief because the stakes are too high. So they're not saying that that's mad. It's totally reasonable that the stakes involved in putting P to work should affect what it's proper to do and what it's proper to believe. But what is mad, they're arguing, is the idea that whether you're in a position to know could be affected by the stakes. And so traditionally, epistemology has said, whether or not you're in a position to know something just depends on the evidence that you have. And it depends on the reliability of the methods you've used in evaluating that evidence, right? So whether or not you know something should only depend on things that are relevant to the truth of the proposition. But to say that the stakes affect whether you know something is to say that something totally non-cognitive, something that just has to do with your goals and your interests and your fears, should determine whether or not you can claim to know something. So that's very counterintuitive, and the authors of this text say, if you accept fallibilism and you accept a sort of pragmatist interpretation of fallibilism, then you also have to accept pragmatic encroachment. You have to accept the conclusion of this argument, which is whether or not you know something depends on the stakes involved in you putting that proposition to work in your beliefs or in your action. Okay, so that's a fairly complex and difficult argument, but I think it's an interesting and valuable one, and I look forward to discussing it with people on seminar this week. Thanks for your time and attention.